How World War I changed the map of Europe forever. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your country no longer exists. Not because it was conquered in a battle yesterday, but because an entire empire had vanished from the map. That is exactly what happened to millions of Europeans after World War I. When the war began in 1914, Europe looked completely different from the Europe we know today. Massive empires controlled huge territories. Borders that seem permanent today simply did not exist. But by the time the guns fell silent in 1918, four mighty empires had collapsed. New nations had been born, and the map of Europe had been redrawn forever. This is the story of how World War I changed the map of Europe. Before the war, much of Central and Eastern Europe was dominated by the powerful Austro-Hungarian Empire, a vast multinational empire stretching across the heart of the continent. But the empire was a patchwork of different ethnic groups: Czechs, Slovaks, Hungarians, Croats, Serbs, and many others all lived under one ruler. When the war ended and the empire collapsed, its lands were divided into several new countries. The new nation of Czechoslovakia emerged. The kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was created, eventually becoming Yugoslavia. Meanwhile, Austria and Hungary became separate nations. An empire that had existed for centuries was gone almost overnight. But that wasn't the only giant to fall. To the east stood the mighty Russian Empire, one of the largest empires in history. The hardships of war led to revolution. The Tsar was overthrown, and the empire began to break apart. As a result, countries such as Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania gained independence. For millions of people, new borders meant new identities and new governments. Then there was the defeated German Empire. Germany lost significant territory after the war. The province of Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France. Parts of eastern Germany were transferred to the newly recreated Poland, giving Poland access to the sea. This created the famous Polish corridor, which separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. Many Germans felt humiliated by these territorial losses. That resentment would later help fuel the rise of Adolf Hitler and set the stage for another devastating conflict. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled vast territories for hundreds of years, was also collapsing. Its European possessions were largely lost, and the empire eventually gave way to modern Turkey. Across Europe and the Middle East, old borders disappeared, and new ones appeared. By 1919, diplomats gathered at the Paris Peace Conference to redraw the continent. Their goal was simple: create a more stable Europe. But the reality was far more complicated. New countries were created, yet many ethnic groups still found themselves trapped inside borders they did not choose. Minorities suddenly became foreigners in lands where their families had lived for generations. The map looked cleaner on paper, but beneath those new lines were tensions waiting to explode. In fact, many historians argue that World War I did not truly end in 1918. Instead, the peace settlements created problems that helped lead directly to World War II just 2 decades later. When people think of World War I, they often imagine trenches, machine guns, and massive battles. But one of the war's most lasting impacts was something much simpler: a map. A map that erased centuries-old empires. A map that created entirely new nations. A map that changed the lives of millions. And a map whose consequences are still visible in Europe today. The next time you look at Europe on a globe, remember this: many of those borders were drawn in the shadow of World War I. And the world we live in today was shaped by the lines that appeared after the guns finally fell silent. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating tales from history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more incredible stories from the past.